Hello. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. We are waiting for our fourth panellist to arrive, but as he might be some time, he's in a huddle at the moment, I think. So we're going to get started now. So I just want to say thank you for coming to this side event on keeping 1.5 degrees alive through energy transitions. My name is Felicity Morrison. I'm from the UK COP26 presidency. But a big thank you to IRENA for organising this side event today. Just to set out a bit of context, why are we here talking about this? So as we know, keeping 1.5 degrees in reach requires halving global emissions by 2030, and that is a huge challenge. We have the technologies and we know many of the policies and investments that need to be made, but even so, we need a massive acceleration. But by working together, we can enable all countries to make the transition to cheaper, cleaner power at an earlier date. So at COP26, leaders of 47 countries, representing 70% of global GDP, endorsed the Breakthrough Agenda. And this was a commitment to work together internationally this decade to accelerate the development and deployment of the clean technologies needed to meet our Paris climate goals, ensuring they are affordable and accessible to all. So leaders agreed on a set of key goals, of common goals for key sectors, so power, road transport, hydrogen, steel and agriculture, aimed at reaching tipping points before 2030, where clean technologies become more affordable, accessible and attractive than fossil fuels. Meeting the Glasgow Breakthrough Goals could create 20 million jobs and add more than $16 trillion to the global economy in the 5 sectors that account for more than 50% of global emissions. The 47 leaders who signed up to this at COP26 agreed to review progress towards the Breakthrough Goals annually, starting in 2022. This global checkpoint process is underway, supported by an annual report led by the IEA, IRENA and the UN High-Level Action Champions, which will be published later this year. The Breakthrough Agenda is an unprecedented international clean technology plan committing countries to work together to accelerate low-carbon transitions in each emitting sector of the global economy. So in this event, we'll be discussing global progress in the energy transition and actions that must be taken in the coming years to accelerate the energy transition aligned with the 1.5 degrees pathway, with a focus on how the Breakthrough Agenda can contribute to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. With that, I'd just like to briefly introduce our panel before turning to our scene-setting presentation. So yet to arrive is Sharif Dawood, who is the councillor from the COP27 presidency team. To my left here, we have Dolf Galen, Director of the IRENA Innovation and Technology Centre. Sitting next to him is Simon Sharp, Director of Economics from the High-Level Champions team. And at the end is Daniele Violetti, Senior Director of Programmes Coordination for the UNFCCC. And thank you all for joining us on this panel today. I'd now like to invite Dolf to make the opening presentation for this event. Dolf is the Director of the IRENA Innovation and Technology Centre in Bonn. Since 2011, he has overseen the agency's work on advising member countries in energy transitions, renewable energy, technology status and roadmaps, energy planning, cost and markets, and innovation policy frameworks. And he's going to set the scene for today's discussion by presenting the findings from IRENA's World Energy Transitions Outlook. Thank you, Dolf. And if you want to come up here to do that presentation, I'll sit down. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felicity, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll give you a very brief introduction into insights from our World Energy Transitions Outlook and what they mean for the breakthroughs in hydrogen power, steel and transport. We have issued the 1.5 degree pathway, net zero 2050, last year. Last year's report was very much a 2050 focus. We've issued a new edition this year, very much a 2030 focus for the same pathway. And next year, we'll give you all the details for the G20 countries. So we're going still more into detail and still more into practical action. And this is high level what we think needs to happen to 2050. So you need about 37 gigatons of energy and process CO2 emission reduction, baseline roughly flat. And how to achieve that depends very much on, we see a key role for renewables, especially renewable power, but also biomass, energy efficiency and electrification with even more renewable power. These are the three key components, 70% or so of the total. We see also a role for hydrogen, around 10%. It's significant, but if you follow today's energy discussion, you would think hydrogen is even more important, but this is the role we see, and we can discuss. And we also have quite significant CCS in there, especially BECCS, biomass CCS, to get to that net zero, especially in a number of the hard to decarbonize sectors. There is some discussion around the role of hydrogen, the role of CCS. I would say these other three components, renewables, efficiency, and electrification, is generally accepted across all the major strategy studies I've seen. So, and that's good because that gives some policy confidence then. Now, what does that mean for the energy mix? So here you see the final energy consumption. You see the total amount of energy is roughly flat, despite the fact that the world economy grows 2.5-fold. So there's significant efficiency effects in there. And you see that the mix changes significantly, less of the black and gray area, so less fossil fuels, and more electricity coming in, the yellow area. So up to 2030, we have about 30% share of electricity, up from slightly over 20% today. And you see also other renewables coming into play. And to make that happen to 2030, we need to increase energy investments by about 60% compared to the reference case. So we need annual investments of around 6-5 trillion per year, or an increase of around $2.2 trillion per year. And of course, the structure of investments changes substantially. Less fossil fuel, much more efficiency, renewables, electrification. And because the investment volume is higher, there is a positive GDP impact in the initial years in the order of 2.5% per year, later in the order of 0.5% per year. And because of this energy transition, also there are more jobs. So the employment increases by about a percentage point up to 2030, which is equivalent to around 140 million people working in the energy sector. So it's an increase of about 31% compared to reference scenario. Now, what does all of this now mean for hydrogen? We need a lot of hydrogen. We see a role also for blue hydrogen, but we think longer term green hydrogen will be the dominant form because the cost reduction potential is much more significant. We know that there is a lot of projects coming. The Green Hydrogen Compact from Glasgow, the catalogue already adds up to 129 gigawatts, 2030 of electrolyzers. We need, in fact, almost 3 times that number to be on this path. You hear a lot about millions of tons of hydrogen plants. Keep in mind, every million ton of green hydrogen means 10 gigawatts of electrolyzers, means 20 gigawatts of renewable power capacity. So we have to add a lot of renewable power to make this happen. And to put the gigawatts into context, so the sales of electrolyzers last year was 0.5 gigawatt. So we need to scale up very significantly going forward. Now, one way to use that hydrogen, and the most promising way for future trade, is ammonia. So you can use green ammonia, green hydrogen to produce ammonia. We see a lot of activity in this field, at least 15 million tons of production capacity where we're fairly certain for 2030. We need even more. And another factor of what we need for hydrogen is an internationally compatible set of standards and certifications. So we're currently exploring that for G7. We'll come with a report after summer. We've identified already 15 different schemes, which of course are not compatible. So there is a need for harmonization going forward if we really want to trade hydrogen and hydrogen-derived commodities going forward in the coming years. So this is also an issue of high urgency. Now, steel, the decarbonization has always been challenging because of competitiveness issues. The recent discussion in Europe around carbon border adjustment mechanisms is a little bit disappointing. There are some delays. So we need to deal with that issue. On the technology side, there's been a lot of talk about CCS, but very few projects. What is new now is that hydrogen is given much more attention on a lot of projects around the world, but still small scale. So massive ramp up needed. Renewable power, 3 terawatts installed. You see something which looks like exponential growth, so that's very positive. But the 3 terawatt is just a start. We need 10 terawatts by 2030. We need 26 terawatts by 2050. So, and to make that happen, we need this new generation capacity and we need flexibility measures, which are very power system specific. But we know how to do this. So if you have any questions on that, let us know. And finally then, the EVs. So we see electromobility as the key trend, both for cars and for freight, road freight. And an indicator for that is the battery manufacturing, which is going to quadruple between 21 and 25. Massive amounts of battery being produced that will be deployed. Apart from these cars, we also need the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. There we need to accelerate. For example, in Europe, we need a 7-fold acceleration. And also, of course, we need the critical materials, notably the lithium, but also, for example, nickel, to make this transition happen. So that's a short overview. If you want more information, look on our website or we're around. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Dolph. I'll just now invite the remaining panel members to make some opening remarks. So I might start with Simon Sharp, who's part of the UN High-Level Champion Actions team working on the Breakthrough Agenda and was previously Deputy Director of Policy Campaigns for COP26 in the UK government. Simon.
Well, hi. And thanks, Dolph, for that opening presentation. That was really great to see. I think it reminds us all the scale of the challenge. A lot of those numbers you were talking about show an incredible acceleration that is needed. A number that I often refer to just encapsulate that need for acceleration is that we have to decarbonize the global economy roughly 5 times faster over the course of this decade than we managed over the last 2 decades. That's in terms of GHGs per unit GDP globally. So how on earth do we do that? And importantly, how can international cooperation help? I think over the 30 years or so that we've had, you can say that there's been really important progress made, that this process of negotiations has helped to build international consensus that is far stronger now than it ever was before. And it's also generated a large number of international commitments individually by countries, which we all know are not yet strong enough in aggregate, but they're getting better. And the commitment to net zero by round about mid-century is now one that is supported by countries and others representing about 90% of global GDP. So that's incredible progress, but we're still faced by the need for that kind of acceleration. And so the question is, what more can we have? What more kinds of international cooperation can accelerate progress? And Felicity mentioned the breakthrough agenda's aim of crossing these tipping points in each of the major emitting sectors of the global economy. And the crucial thing is it's a commitment to cooperate in each sector. And I think some of what Dolph was mentioning just then was highlighting how each of these sectors are very different. They need different kinds of cooperation to overcome the challenges and access the opportunities. And in hydrogen, for example, how do we deploy hydrogen really quickly, using it for green ammonia, getting the cost down? That demands a different kind of cooperation involving different countries doing different things compared to, say, the power sector or steel or indeed agriculture or shipping. So in each of these sectors, we have to understand what is the system transition that we're trying to achieve, what are the leverage points for that transition, and which countries working together can activate those leverage points and make fast progress. So I'm really happy to be working with IRENA and also the IEA as part of this process, where we will set out a report that advises countries on specifically where they can cooperate to best effect in several of these large emitting sectors. And we'll have that report coming out in September, but we can talk a little bit today about some of the emerging findings.
Thank you, Simon. I'll turn now to Daniele Violetti, who is the Senior Director of the Programmes Coordination and Director of the Means of Implementation Division in the UNFCCC. Would you like to make some opening remarks?
Thanks. Good afternoon to all of you, and thanks for the invitation to join you today. I think I will really limit my remarks to bring in the context of the discussion closer to our UNFCCC process, in particular by highlighting the fact that we came out from COP26 with a good sense of achievement in having kept the 1.5 alive, and of course this was a critical moment, and since then very important facts happened. First of all, of course, the international geopolitical situation has changed dramatically, as we know, and new emergencies have emerged, which are affecting the scenario we were thinking of being. And the second one is that important scientific reports were released. And if you look at the last IPCC report, Working Group 3, where again they refer to the need for major transitions and the urgency to take immediate urgent action and stepping up on what has been done so far, are really putting a lot of pressure on everybody, governments at first, and therefore the importance of international cooperation and innovation in technology deployment and use is so critical. At the same time, if we look at what has been happening here in the session, in some rooms, this sense of urgency has not yet translated into action, and some very difficult negotiations have been happening, are still ongoing. For example, in the discussion on the work plan on mitigation, which should be a logical, natural consequence of putting in practice this urgency, but still we see how challenging they are for all the, of course, the reason that can be brought up in the negotiation. So I think this match needs to be really made and strengthened so that everybody is moving at the same pace in the same direction soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And finally, our last panelist, thank you for joining us. Sharif Dawood is the Deputy Head of the Sustainable Development Unit at the Ministry for Planning and Economic Development of Egypt, and he's part of the COP 2017. Would you like to make some opening remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Madam, and thank you so much for giving me the time and for the invitation for that very important event. Indeed, I'm personally lucky because I'm having two hats. I'm already seconded from the Foreign Affairs, so I've been part of the negotiations, and now I work with the Ministry of Planning, so I'm part of the implementation side. And this gives me like a little bit of more luck to see different perspectives of that process. Let me start by mentioning that the nexus between energy, food, and water is very important. And actually the importance of integrating climate change into the bigger picture, which is the efforts to achieve sustainable development and poverty eradication in the context of the implementation of the SDGs. So this is where we start from in Egypt. We have the Vision 2030, which matches with the different SDGs. And as per this vision, we have targets when it comes to the share of renewable energy to the energy mix. So until the year 2022, we achieved the target set, which is getting the renewable energy forming around 20% of the energy mix. And we aim at reaching the target of getting this percentage up to 42% by the year 2030. In this context, several projects have been implemented on the ground, including the solar farm in Bimban, Aswan, which is one of the biggest solar farms worldwide. Its capacity of production is around 1.8 gigawatts of electricity, made as an investment of more than 2.2 billion US dollars, and this was also done through climate finance, because the Green Climate Fund through the implementing agency of the EBRD has been a main contributor to that, and it was also a public-private partnership of more than 32 companies between local and multinationals, and it created almost 10,000 job opportunities, whether they are direct or indirect, for the local community in Aswan in the south of Egypt. In addition, there have been also projects for wind farms by the Gulf of Suez in an area called Za'farana and Gabal al-Zayt. It aims at producing 500 megawatts at the cost of 600 million US dollars, and it's also a public-private partnership. One key issue that we aim at investing on is the issue of green hydrogen, which we really give it an utmost importance for the time period. So one of the major tools the government is using is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which was recently established. The Sovereign Wealth Fund is trying to green its portfolio of investments and to crowd in private investments in different fields of green economy, including the production of green hydrogen. So the fund had a deal with a consortium of companies, including Fertiglobe, Scatic, and Orascom Construction from Egypt, to start its first pilot project for producing green hydrogen in the economic zone of the Suez Canal, and also other companies are approaching the Suez Canal economic area, where we aim at starting the production in November on the margins of the COP21. Let me conclude by two main points. The first point is that Egypt really aims to be a regional hub for green energy, not only for energy. So investments in solar, wind, green hydrogen is key for us, and it's a priority for the government. And we are able to do so only through public-private partnerships, investments, and joint effort. This can't be a pure government investment. It has to be a multi-stakeholder partnership. In addition, we are also working on improving the energy efficiency and the transmitting networks and cables, which are also play a key role in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. The second point I would like to conclude with is that Egypt right now is having a surplus of energy, and the more we can guarantee a sustainable offtake of the energy, the more the ambition can be reached when it comes to renewable energy. Because we have the potential to go to up to 50% of the energy mix as renewables, but this is dependent on creating partnerships with off-takers for this renewable and green energy. So if we can strike the deal with our partners and our neighbors, whether from the European continent, Asia or Africa, if we can work together on the interconnectivity, onto linking these markets together, creating this sustainable demand, then the sustainable supply will be there, ambition will be increased, and reaching this balance between the economic growth, transition to green economy, saving the environment, saving the planet, and going in a climate resilient and low emission growth pathway would be achieved. I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much for that, Sharif. I think we might just now continue the discussion with our panel members, and then shortly we'll turn to the audience for some questions and answers, so if you can be thinking about those as well. But firstly, I might just go back to Dolph. Thank you for your presentation on the World Energy Transitions Outlook for this year. In that context of that report, how do you view work towards the achievement of the breakthrough aim to make affordable, renewable and low-carbon hydrogen globally available by 2030? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we need a number of things. We need, first of all, a lot more renewable power if we really want to produce substantial amounts of green hydrogen. We need a lot more electrolyzer manufacturing capacity, and we need to continue work to improve these electrolyzer technologies. So what I mean by that is the energy efficiency. There is still some potential, not that much, but some potential. Also, we need to make sure that we pick technologies that do not create new potential bottlenecks in terms of critical materials. And we need to go to a production level this decade of at least 30 gigawatts per year. So from the half a gigawatt produced last year. So, and then on top of that, we want cheap hydrogen, which means that we need to produce it at places where renewable power is cheap, which means that we need to trade that hydrogen. So we need pipelines, we need some mode of shipping, and so ammonia looks as the best one. So that whole system needs to be developed. The enabling framework, including standards and certification, needs to be developed and put in place in coming years. So it's really urgent that we make quick progress.
Thank you very much, Dolph. Just to then go on to Sharif, you were mentioning in your opening remarks just then that the national strategy for climate change 2050 that Egypt recently launched has among its targets this aim to increase the share of renewables in its power mix to 42% by 2035. Just interested in hearing more from you about how that strategy is going to promote a 1.5 degrees future, and going back to some of Dolph's comments just now, what role will green hydrogen play in implementing that national strategy? If you can elaborate on that, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, the use of renewable energy would mean automatically the decrease reliance and dependence on fossil fuel, and this would actually help in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and achieving the mitigation target. Not only that, but there is also a low-hanging fruit, which is the energy efficiency. improving the energy efficiency systems, improving the grids and the networks of transmitting and distribution of electricity, and even other policies, including the reform of the fossil fuel subsidy, which Egypt had started since 2015. All these policies can play an incremental role in decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions, and this would definitely help with the achievement of the goals of the Paris Agreement, including the 1.5 to 2 degrees scenarios, which is listed in Article 2 of the agreement. That's from one end. As for the hydrogen, I would recall my previous speaker mentioning the issue of the costing and the price of the hydrogen for the time being that might not be that competitive. However, this does not stop us in Egypt to invest in that particular matter. I think two elements here could be very relevant. First, the issue of the offtake and the export to other markets, and the second is the potential use as an alternative fuel for the maritime industry and ships. And that's why the area of the Suez Canal is very crucial in this particular manner, as well as the issues of ammonia and the production of green ammonia, and which can be definitely used not only as a fuel, but also in agriculture and land-used activities. The third point, that we have been approached by some IT companies speaking about the use of green hydrogen for supporting their data systems. And, you know, the data centers and the servers consume a lot of energy. So using this fuel could be also a solution that help in that particular manner. So that's for the question. In case of further elaborations, I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharif. We've heard quite a lot of mention about international cooperation. So I just wonder if we can turn now back to Simon. You've as I spoke about earlier, the global checkpoint process is including this annual State of the Transition report, which is assessing global progress and identifying opportunities for further international coordination gains. What do the findings thus far mean for the breakthrough agenda?
Sure. Well, I think that the first thing I'd say is that cooperation is not just a nice word. It's very real. Dolph was showing earlier how the transition can be an economic positive, not a negative. And that means international cooperation can be positive sum, not negative sum. And what we're looking at in this report is some quite specific coordination gains, economic gains that arise from countries aligning their efforts. So, for example, we're seeing real potential for larger economies of scale and faster cost reduction when countries align on their technology choices and their deployment measures. So, for example, in the power sector, we've already seen solar, the cost comes down about 28% with every doubling of cumulative global deployment. Wind, it comes down about 15%. You have similar rights law relationships, that cost coming down in proportion to cumulative production with batteries and with electrolyzers. And to give one example, if you take the road transport sector, we had a presentation this morning at another event that showed it only takes the three largest markets to coordinate their regulatory trajectories, and you can get faster cost reduction so much that you hit that cost parity tipping point where the EVs become cheaper than the fossil fuel cars up to 5 years earlier. So that's just indicative of what you can get in terms of economies of scale. A second one that is important in some sectors, but not all, is level playing fields. You know, if you want international shipping to be using green ammonia, for example, then those shipping operators need to know that they can do that without being undercut by the international competition. And it's really important to make that happen. Otherwise, you're just not going to get that investment, and there won't be the demand to take up that supply that we're trying to invest in. That's true in shipping, aviation, steel, agricultural commodities probably. That's an incredibly important thing. It's not saying competition will always be there. The issue is whether international competition is an accelerator of the transition, which it can be if you have the right rules in place, or whether it's a brake, which it will be if you don't have those rules in place. A third one to mention is faster innovation. That's fairly obvious. If countries are aligning their RD&D efforts, they will discover and develop solutions more quickly. I think Dolph referred to steel. There are very few pilot projects. They're quite small. There's a desperate need not only to scale those up, but to share the learning quite deeply between countries as they start doing that. And a final one to mention is infrastructure. I think people have already mentioned, Sharif mentioned power sector interconnectors, Dolph mentioned hydrogen pipelines. You could also mention charging infrastructure for international transport on land, air and sea. Again, that's a critical area for countries to work together. There's no point fueling up a ship with ammonia in one place if it can't refuel when it gets to the other end of its route. So in all of these areas, we've got some good foundations to build on, but actually we're nowhere close to having the level of international cooperation that we need, or the structures to support it. So I think that will be the kind of message coming out of our report.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Well, of course, we have to acknowledge the role of the UNFCCC and international cooperation on this point. So, Daniela, you spoke in your opening remarks about let me just find it, about the major transitions required and the urgency of doing so. Can you tell us your thoughts on the importance of that systematic transformation and how the UNFCCC is promoting this?
Thanks. Perhaps I would like to connect to your recent point about the global checkpoint process and indicating also that we are seeing very relevant and actually absolutely necessary action being taken by all stakeholders in the markets in itself. Including the work that is happening with the champions and the Marrakesh Partnership, all the pathways, and all these are very essential, not only to move the climate action agenda forward at a faster pace, but also to put pressure where it needs to be in terms of showcasing what is possible and what can be achieved. Now, I think we have these roadmaps, we have a lot of commitments. Equally important, though, is to monitor progress constantly and regularly and taking stock on where we are and bring that back to the process where possible. But at the same time, we are trying to contribute with our Global Climate Action Portal in showcasing this and also indicating where things have been implemented and so that lessons can be learned and replicated elsewhere. But I think the big opportunity here for the UNFCCC process is going to be the global stocktake. That's really the avenue to make a real difference for the future. Now, the process has just started. Here in Bonn, you have been hopefully participating in this. It's a long process, but by the time we get to COP28 with a good milestone achieved in COP27, there should be really something that is helping this transformation. And that should be the guidance that all are committed to. And that should also look at, individual sectors and not only, global levels. And then if these are targets, it all has to be seen. But it's really something that is probably the unique opportunity we have, because by the time of the next 5 years, the second global stocktake most likely will be too late for some of these. So, and that's again urgency to, everybody, all stakeholders, to put the right pressure on those who are going to be deciding at the time of the global stocktake the next steps, which eventually, I hope, that's my personal opinion, all these initiatives, including the breakthrough, they should be part of the official equation.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've answered my next question to you as well, so that's very well done. I might just turn to the audience now, open up for some questions from you so that we can bring in participation. I think there's also a chance for some people watching online to answer questions, so I might ask Claire to assist with that if that's in train. But yes, we've got a hand here at the front. I think we might hand around a microphone. It's on its way over, yeah. Just here. Thanks. Yeah, I've noted a couple of hands. Please, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lukona. I'm part of a youth NGO called Care About Climate. During this SB 56, there are several indigenous climate activists coming from everywhere in the world, including South America and Norway, that have warned against the effect of the renewable energy transition in their countries and in their communities. Wind farms being implemented on indigenous lands, threatening their livelihood, lithium extraction fields in South America. Therefore, my question is, what actions are you taking or are you planning to take, or any solutions to make a just energy transition that leaves no one behind? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We might take a couple, maybe 3 questions, and then just give the panel some time to think about them. So I think we had another question just down here in the front.
Hello, my name is Sandra Prüfer. I'm a journalist, but I'm also working with Parents for Future globally and fossil fuel treaty initiative. This is something that we are also supporting with a lot of other NGOs. Now, this morning, REN 21 published their new 22 Global Renewable Status Report. And kind of like echoing what you said, that has been an increase in net zero commitments. Also record additions in renewable power, especially solar and wind, plus 17%, but then also an increase in electricity demand. But this is not happening fast enough. You mentioned it has to be, I think, 5 times faster in the next decade. So now that the COP27 also being framed an African COP, and I think 45 African countries, they're both fossil fuel producing countries, but now Egypt or other like Morocco, not where Namibia not, but they are really investing into renewables. How can this be, this transition and maybe phasing out of fossil fuels instead of, like producing liquid gas like in Senegal or in other countries that's, increasing exploration, then leapfrogging in certain countries or actually investing big like you and also in regional cooperation, because the energy crisis is there, prices skyrocketing. It's in 2-digit numbers, high inflation, and that could also lead to unrest. So how would that become, an agenda point? We're talking here about the mitigation program, but what you were saying and the sense of urgency, how is that translated into this mitigation program? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And then we had one just here within the gentleman in the striped shirt. And then we'll come round to the next round of questions after that. Thank you.
Larry Moffat, I'm with Rise for Climate Belgium. Are you concerned about the sudden rush now to find substitutes for Russian oil and gas, not by developing more renewable energy, which we so desperately need, as you clearly explained, but by seeking to invest in oil and gas infrastructure, looking for alternative sources, building terminals for US and Qatar LNG, or we see heads of state making deals with Israel, Senegal, Algeria to exploit their fossil fuel resources.
Thank you very much. So if I can turn now to the panel, I'm not sure if any of you have a burning desire to take one of those questions, or if I should just pick a volunteer. Does anyone want to take one of the questions? I'll allow you to take the floor first and just indicate which one you're answering. Go for it, Simon. Thank you.
I'll pick up the last one, because I think it's a question on a lot of people's minds at the moment. And so how worried are we about the response to the situation with Russia and the higher prices? I think partly worried, partly not. I think naturally all of us worry when we see new investments in fossil fuel infrastructure being made, especially ones that could be long-lasting investments. But I think there are things we're seeing on the other side as well. I think within the European Union, it's not just that's happening. There's also a really increased determination to accelerate the transition away from oil and gas, which can only be positive in terms of the transitions in road transport and also heating. So I think that's a sort of short to medium term, actually positive effect of what's obviously a really bad situation. The other thing is, how worried should we be about investments in LNG terminals? Well, LNG is obviously more expensive than pipeline gas, and so those kind of investments are actually going to have a negative effect on the relative competitiveness of gas over time. And, in the UK, when we look at decarbonising heating, for a long time we've been saying, well, this is really difficult. It's so expensive. Heat pumps, massively more expensive than gas. Actually, that's starting to change now. For the first time, people are recently saying heating from heat pumps could in fact be cheaper than gas. There's a combination of the clean tech costs coming down and the fossil costs going up. And if our cost of gas and those of our European neighbours goes up in future because more of it's coming from LNG and less of it's coming from Russian pipelines, well, that only hastens that cost differential moving in the right direction. So I think it's a complex picture. It's not all bad, and it might in fact be net positive for the pace of transition.
Thank you, Simon. I might turn to Daniele and Sharif, if you wouldn't mind sharing a response to the first question about, how do we consider and take into account the effect of renewables on Indigenous peoples, their lives and livelihoods? If you have any thoughts on that one. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I'm coming more from a broader perspective to the sense of the evolution of the concept of just transition. I would say since Paris has been incredibly positive. I mean, I've been working since the old days, for example, on the clean development mechanism, where type of concept like this in implementing renewable energy projects were not really at the center, while now the overall understanding, I would say, that if we want to have this type of transition and transformation and moving on to renewable energy, it can only happen if the concept of just transition for all involved are at the center of that. So I personally witnessing this, and it's happening in any case at the level of policies. Now on the ground, of course, I don't have the direct experience. I can testify to that, but I would say that we are in a much better position now, and the trend is positive. However, I do recognize that a lot has to be done, and in again, the involving the whole society in this type of projects has to be there and has to be the priority, and this is on the side of those involved, if they don't see this happen, to make the others accountable and make it very loud and clear that this is not the case. So, because now there is the political sensitivity to take action, react to these things in a positive way.
Thank you for that. Sharif, did you have anything to add to that one?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on that particular matter, but I can share with you like at least 2 experiences we had from Egypt in that regard. As I mentioned, the Bimban solar farm in Aswan was in the deep south, and during the construction and the operation phase, we made sure that the jobs created are distributed as much as possible to the local community in order just to improve their quality of life and give them another opportunity and get them exposed to different sort of technologies than the traditional applied one. And this really helped. Actually, 10,000 jobs were created in that context, and the local community has benefited a lot. And even the indirect benefits through the people who just migrated to live to that city in the south of Aswan, the hotel industry, the FMCG industry, among others, have been benefiting from that project so much. And the second was related to the wind farms in the Gulf of Suez, because we realized that this is a pathway for the migratory birds and the migratory species. So an effort has to be done through installing graders that can do an automatic shutdown to these wind farms during the migration season of the birds, in order not to affect the ecosystem and also the livelihoods for the people who are living there. Because this, once the ecosystem is affected, the whole order there would be affected, because those birds help into other ecosystem services for agriculture, for fisheries, etc., etc. So we made sure that this is designed in a manner that takes into consideration the circumstances of the local area that has been there. If you may allow me, I could also go to the third question directly, related to Africa and its needs and circumstances and issues related to energy. Let me start by mentioning the following. The COP is a global event. Egypt is hosting it on behalf of Africa, which might give an opportunity to the African countries to voice up their concerns, to voice up their needs and aspirations, but it does not prevent any other group of putting their topics on the agenda. So having it an African COP, of course, does not undermine the global nature of the process. And we, as the presidency, we make sure that we stand at equal distance of all parties and also non-parties. Everyone is having a seat around the table, and everyone is encouraged to participate, because everyone has a role to play in the addressing of the issue of the climate change. Moving from that point to the other point related to the energy production in Africa, fossil fuel. Of course, the issue of just transition have been gaining a grown momentum in the discussions here, but it was not only focused on the roundtable or the work program for mitigation. It has been discussed in the global stocktake, and it has been discussed in other fora. And from my very humble opinion, it's not only restricted to energy, it is restricted also to other industries. Like Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents to the impacts of climate change. And the change of the rates of precipitation, the droughts, the floods, the extreme weather events are affecting other economic sectors, including agriculture, food production, fisheries, pastures, and other sectors. So just transition is not only restricted to energy, it has also impacts to other fields that could be also correspondent to the work of the negotiation track on adaptation, loss and damage, and response measures. Having said that, within the African group, while I'm not specialist on this particular matter, because I focus only on the global stocktake for this COP, I can check with my colleagues and get back to you, but we always try to balance between the two rights, the right to develop and the right to protect the environment and provide an opportunity for the other generations. Having said that, and linking it to the current geopolitical situation, of course, Africa can play a role into providing more and more green energy, more and more renewable energy. This could fill the gap in the global energy market. However, as I mentioned, this is directly linked to the sustainability of demand. Ensuring the sustainable offtake would definitely encourage countries to go more green. The availability of support when it comes to finance, technology transfer, and capacity building will enable the African countries to increase their ambition to both achieve food and energy security while addressing the impacts of climate change. So it's kind of a corresponding process. It's like having the prerequisites, having the enablers, having the technology, the fund, the legislative and the institutional setup that would encourage and promote that would definitely help Africa to achieve this growth pathway that is reflected in Article 2.1c of the agreement, that is low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sharif, and for answering 2 questions. Dolph, did you have anything you wanted to add to the answers for any of those? Or yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, maybe on the Africa question and what this now means for Africa development. We are currently supporting the Africa Union Commission in developing the Continental Master Plan for the power sector in Africa. And it's clear that renewables can play a much more important role going forward. We always get a lot of questions then okay, can you also create jobs, and can we also start a PV factory? And we see that there is indeed a lot of jobs, as you hear, for example, from Egypt. Even if you don't have a PV factory, just the jobs in building these installations are significant. We get a lot of questions around export potentials, and we're actively supporting a number of countries looking into that. Of course, North Africa to Europe is on the agenda, but also ammonia is on the agenda. Also, green steel, for example, is on the agenda. We're getting a lot of questions around critical minerals and materials mining opportunities and the opportunities to build industries on that base, be it battery industries or other industries. And we see also some opportunities there. We look also at the ESG component of that. We're just starting up a new working group on that as part of our collaborative framework on critical materials. So there is a lot of interest into all of this. We're trying to support countries as much as possible into that, but we really see a need to enhance the understanding of all these opportunities, because it's still quite early days.
Thank you very much, Dolph. I think I've seen a few more hands. This gentleman in a blue mask in the middle there had his hand up first. Come to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel for a very interesting discussion. My name is John Christensen. I'm sort of partly UN Environment and partly from a Danish NGO called Concito. I very much agree with what you talked about the energy transition, but if you look at the title of the session, it's keeping 1.5 degrees alive also. And I mean, that's something we need to do in the next sort of, within the decade anyway. And I think a lot of the things you talked about so far is things that require time to build, establish, and sort of, I mean, the whole hydrogen so is important for the long-term net zero. But if you could reflect a little bit about what do we do in the short term to keep the 1.5 degree alive. I mean, IPCC told us in the Working Group 3 report that we haven't got our act together by 2030, the budget is used, and we can't come back to it. So I mean, it's really about the short-term urgency, and maybe a little bit, Alfonso, on your sort of reflection on efficiency, because I think that is really what you need to do in the really short term, because even the renewables that we all agree needs to be built will take time, and we can't have enough capacity up by 2030 to compensate. So you need to do something to reduce also, I think. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I wonder before we go to the next questions, we might just go to each of our panellists and say, what's the one thing that we need to do in the short term to keep 1.5 alive in the context of energy transitions? Daniele, can I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, and thanks. I mean, I guess I will repeat a few of the same points, but I think we need really that all actors, particularly those coming from outside the climate change process, are pushing and asking for not only more ambition, but also for giving this level of comfort that there is no other way to move forward, and that is the one that is can be the civil society, can be all actor, very important, the private sector role, that this is doable and this is the only way to go. Without that, I don't think it's possible. Without that, we would not even have the Paris Agreement agreed back then. So that's, for me, the only recipe.
Thank you. Simon?
Well, it's a tough question, one thing that would help us keep 1.5 alive. But if I had to say one thing, it would be change the way we think about the economics of it. And I don't mean see it as an opportunity instead of a cost, although we should, it is, and that's part of it. It's about deployment policy, because, the stuff we've got to do really quickly is deploy what we have. And since the question's been posed that way, I'm going to yield to the temptation to plug a report. This was what I was discussing this morning in another conference, and it's about the economics of transition. And we have a difficulty, which is that most of our economic decision-making tools are based on an assumption that change will be marginal, that not very much will change. And that's inapplicable when your goal is transformational change. And the kind of examples we've seen, India brought down the cost of LED lighting by 85% in 4 years and brought electric lighting into millions of households that had never had it before, the cheapest lighting in history. The UK brought down the cost of offshore wind 70% in 10 years, created the world's first large market for offshore wind, which lots of other countries are now interested in emulating. Brazil grew its onshore wind faster than any other emerging economy in terms of percent of the energy mix. China obviously did an enormous amount in solar, got its share of the world solar market from something like 4% to 70% over the space of about 8 years. These are incredible successes, and one thing this report says is that generally the policies central to those successes were adopted despite the economic advice and not because of it. So we've absolutely got to change the way we're thinking about the analysis, and if you do that, you can see there are some huge opportunities, putting the right policies in place, get really fast deployment and really fast cost reduction. Does that keep 1.5 alive? Don't know, but it will get us a lot closer.
Thank you for that challenge, Simon. Sharif, any one thing that you would put forward?
Well, it's a tough one, but let me try. In my view, it's ensuring this linkage between ambition and support. The more support is there, the more ambition we'll get. And support should not only be restricted to finance, to capacity building, technology transfer, but as I just mentioned, by ensuring a sustainable demand, by localizing of technology, by directing investments, using innovative tools, including debt swaps, whichever tools of enhancing the level of support that is there for the developing countries, providing them with investments will push them and will help their move towards a more sustainable future. Having said that, the availability of technology, the incentives to the private sector, the promoting of the role of non-party stakeholders, including the civil society, the research, the technology centers, this is key. Without having this encompassing linkage between all actors working together in an ambitious manner, in a manner that provides supports to developing countries, we we can definitely get into reaching the target and keeping the 1.5 degrees alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. Dolph?
Two things. One is what's really critical is coal in the power sector 2030. So, and the way to deal with that is to accelerate renewables. And there is a number of issues that are the barriers right now. There's issues around permitting. There's issues around regulatory frameworks. There's issues around grid access, etc. So all of these issues need to be dealt with urgently. Regarding efficiency, next week I go to London. I fly to London, the ticket was €65. I come back by train, the ticket is €200. So all the incentives are wrong. And the pricing is wrong. So that's another thing that urgently needs fixing.
Thank you, and I can certainly identify with that, having flown here from London and going back by train. Apologies for making that such a one thing sort of answer, but I think that was useful to hear the 4 different responses. We might have 3 more questions now, and then come back to the panel. I understand Daniele has to leave now, but thank you for joining us on the panel. We really appreciate that. I know you're quite busy. So there's a gentleman here at the front in a check shirt, and then we'll go right up the back. I saw your hands there. Thank you.
Hello, David Kay. I'm here at the conference with Mediators Beyond Borders International. I'm also an economist at Cornell University studying renewable energy. My question from an economic development perspective, maybe second-tier issue, is if most of the jobs, as I think, are going to be created in construction rather than manufacturing renewables, how do we think about sustainability of economic development in these communities and trying to avoid some of the problems that come with boom-bust economies that often affect communities that have lots of construction workers there temporarily? And is that being considered in these plans?
Thank you very much for that question. I think there were some hands at the back, if you can raise them again. Yes, just there on the end.
Thank you. I'm Claire Kiss from IRENA. Thank you, everybody, for joining this event. I just have some questions from virtual watchers, streamers. The breakthrough agenda currently covers power, steel, hydrogen, road transport, and agriculture. What other sectors would you like to see included in the breakthrough agenda to help us reach the 1.5 goal? And how can businesses get involved in the breakthrough agenda? And what are the most urgent actions businesses need to take to get emitting sectors to tipping points quicker? I have another question, but I'll let those 2 be answers first. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thanks to those watching online for those questions as well. Who would like to take those? I think we had a first question about sustainability with renewables in terms of most jobs being in construction. Sharif, I see you reaching for your microphone.
Thank you for the question. That I find it very relevant and pertinent. Let me start by stating that it's kind of a new market and it's a learning by doing process. So with the boom of the investment in the solar energy started, honestly speaking, not every developing country had the adequate knowledge when it comes to the technology and how to get into the value added or the fine tech use of this industry. But this doesn't mean that the whole package of jobs that were created, especially in the beginning, were focusing only on construction, because there have been a part focusing mainly on the operation and maintenance of the solar and wind farms that have been established. And this is a significant part that should not be dropped. Having said that, when we now, as a government, work on issues related to hydrogen, we try as much as possible while negotiating with other companies to focus on the elements of technology transfer and the development of R&D. So one of the key elements that we are keen as a government while negotiating with companies working on green hydrogen is the localization of the industry of electrolyzers. We are inviting them to establish their own manufacturing plants of electrolyzers in Egypt, and we're trying to provide them with the relevant economic incentives as per the laws and regulations applied in this context. So maybe this is an area where we are trying to encourage that particular matter. Another element we are also trying to work on is the element of the certification of the green energy. We are also working with development partners in order to build the national capacities on the issue of certification of green energy, issuing green certificates, and calculating and estimating how much reductions with greenhouse gas emissions and all other technical matters related to that new field to us. We are trying to use the best experiences and our previous experiences, especially from the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, and try to adapt it in the context of the Paris Agreement and Article 6 that has been introduced. The third element that is very important here is that we need to ensure the linkage between the educational system and the labor market. So if you are able to introduce to your universities, schools, technical institutes, this sort of capacity building and vocational training, you would be more able to find qualified cadres or officials who are able to work in this industry, and with few incentives in the right manner, as my colleague here just mentioned, you will be able to promote that. Let me tell you one thing or two things here. I'm sorry to taking the floor so long. The level of entrepreneurs, small and micro companies that are working now in elements relating to environment technology is growing highly in Egypt. So you will find now companies that are working on the use of solar power, especially at the household level, the construction of the biofuel reactors, especially in the rural areas where they go to farmers and those who have cattle and establish them bioreactors where they can use the waste from the cattle and generate biogas and organic fertilizers for the land in alternative. Or those who are working right now with the waste management, whether it's the collection, the recycling, and even connecting the dots between the heavy industries and heavy emitters who are working for or are looking for alternatives for the fossil fuel, and those who are having this massive percentage of the municipal waste and the agricultural waste that has a high organic component and could be used in generating energy for these factors. In addition to the recycling, of course, of the e-waste, which is a growing field right now all over the world. So it's kind of going up bottom and bottom up approach at the same time, but synchronizing these efforts, giving the due incentives, linking the education to the labor market would be key in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we had two other questions about so what other sectors should be included, and how can businesses most be involved in the breakthrough agenda. Simon, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks. In terms of other sectors, I would say shipping and aviation are both sectors where there's a large amount of emissions growth, where international coordination is going to be really important to get the clean technologies or clean fuels deployed. So I'd say those two as real priorities. A third one is buildings, where compared to other sectors, the international connections are not so strong, but there are probably still some quite important opportunities for coordination to accelerate progress. And a fourth one, I'd say cement, because again, it's quite a large chunk of emissions and very likely some significant opportunities that could come from countries working together. There was a question, I think, following that, which was about how businesses can contribute to this agenda. And I want to say two ways they can do that. One is to use their lobbying power, and the other is to use their buying power. On the lobbying power, I think it's incredibly helpful for governments to hear from businesses what it is that they need from us what can we as governments do to enable them to make a faster transition? And not only individually in a national context, but also together in an international context. A great example of where that's been done is in shipping. The Global Maritime Forum and its Getting to Zero coalition has industry players from throughout that value chain that have come together and said to countries, look, this is what we need you to do individually and together. There are companies like Maersk that have really used their leadership in the sector to help convene those kind of efforts. So that's really gold standard. Second thing, using their buying power. For quite a long time now, we've had these groups like EV100 and RE100, where companies get together and use their buying power to commit to only buying clean technologies, clean power or zero-emission vehicles or whatever it is. That's incredibly helpful because it strengthens those reinforcing feedbacks of demand, investment, innovation, cost reduction. That's absolutely what we need to do. It's incredibly helpful. I think where we're moving now is in a direction of doing that not just for quite mature clean technologies, but also for the far less mature ones. So you're seeing the formation of groups for clean freight, for buying sustainable aviation fuel, and even for making commitments to purchase green steel. And that's incredibly helpful, again, for a steel company. They're far more likely to invest in green steel production if they have some future offtake commitments. So, for example, a company like Volvo saying they're going to commit now to buying zero-emission steel to go into their cars, that's extremely powerful. And there are groups like the First Movers Coalition where companies are getting together, aggregating their demand and providing a stronger signal to investment. So I think those are things businesses can do that will make an enormous contribution.
Thanks very much, Simon. I think we had one question from the gentleman here in the black shirt, and then I think we'll go back to Claire for any other questions from the virtual participants.
Hello, good afternoon. Tony Shiregalada from the Manila Observatory. In most situations, more importantly in developing countries, for the longest time, renewable energy developers have relied on power purchase agreements and public-private finance. A recent increasing trend is that these power purchase agreements are getting shorter in time, and mixed finance inherently dislikes small-scale RE developers because of merchant risk. My question is, should there be a greater push from foreign banks to step into developing countries to be guarantors, or conceptually, would it make more sense to let the current situation play out? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Claire, up the back, do you have more questions from virtual participants for us?
Yep, just this one. The landscape of support for and asks of countries can seem overwhelming to countries with limited capacity. What can the Breakthrough Agenda do to help them in this regard?
Thank you very much, Claire. Are there any other questions? We can take one more. No? Great. Okay, well, over to our panel again. Delph, would you like to answer either of those questions? Thank you.
Well, maybe the question on the PPAs and their role going forward. The cost of renewables, of course, also have continued to come down to a level where it's in most situations now the lowest cost form of renewable power available. And you see that also increasingly reflected in the government and in the utility plans on how to expand this power generation going forward. So there is increasingly an economic incentive to move in this direction. And for companies, it's of course also increasingly important to show that they really use renewable clean power. So also that is an incentive to move in that direction. Well, maybe I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Dolph. And the second question on the breakthrough agendas. Simon, I see you reaching. Thank you.
Sure. That was a really good question, because I think you said the current landscape was overwhelming in two regards. One was the offers of support, and the other was the number of asks. I think the breakthrough agenda can and should contribute to making both of those less overwhelming. In terms of the support that's offered, I think quite a good emerging model is the Energy Transition Council in the power sector, which is a group that includes about 10 of the major donor countries, IRENA, IEA, World Bank, African and Asian development banks, all getting together and trying to coordinate their efforts so that instead of offering such a confusing mixture of support, they can come to countries and say, look, this is what we can offer collectively to help you. And not just say, here's a fund that you can apply to, and maybe in 2 years' time we'll tell you whether you've got any money or not, but be far more responsive and say, if you've identified a need, we'll actually get people to respond to that within months, not years, maybe even weeks. So I think we need something a bit like that in each of the emitting sectors that can offer coherent support responsively and quickly. Regarding the asks, I mean, there are always going to be lots of asks because solving climate change is such a big problem. When we were COP presidency, we got criticized for having lots of asks, but how can you not if you want the whole world to move quickly? But what I think we can do is help countries, and in fact any other actors, understand where their points of leverage are in the international system. And, for me, hearing you talk about Egypt and what it's thinking of doing in terms of shipping in the Suez Canal and also in terms of clean energy interconnectors to the rest of the region, those are two critical points of leverage that you have to support a global transition in those two sectors. Whereas, there might be other sectors like road transport or something where you still need to decarbonize it, but you can't contribute to shifting the global markets in the same way. For example, the European Union or China and the US can, where those three are something like 60% of the global market. So if we try and understand transitions in that way, I think we help identify our points of leverage, and that gives us a way of at least prioritizing between the asks.
Thank you so much, Simon. I think we might conclude with the questions there, but I just want to thank our panellists for such a rich discussion this afternoon. I found it really interesting. I hope you have too. From that discussion, I think it's clear that international cooperation is really essential in not only keeping 1.5 alive, but also in accelerating the energy transitions. And it's been encouraging to hear how the breakthrough agenda can act as a sort of a framework for lots of different initiatives, as well as hearing the practical examples that we did and how state and non-state actors can achieve a common goal. So IRENA, the IEA and the high-level champions are busy working on the State of Sectoral Transitions report. A thank you to those of you, some of you might be in this room, who are already engaging in that process. The next major moment for the breakthrough agenda will be when that report is published in September this year, ahead of the Clean Energy Ministerial and the Mission Innovation meetings in Pittsburgh. So please do get in touch with the breakthrough teams if you have questions, of course, but particularly if you're part of an existing initiative that would like more information about how to engage with the breakthrough agenda, or if you're perhaps part of a country delegation that's interested in endorsing the breakthrough agenda and participating in the dialogues. But otherwise, thank you to everyone for your attendance. Thank you to the audience for your questions, including virtually. And we'll end it here, but you might be able to grab our remaining panelists for a quick question before they duck off if you're lucky. Thank you for coming, and hope you enjoyed the session today. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, can I leave this with you? Yes, sure. Thank you very much.